DevilNeverCry.
What is up everyone, it is me DevilNeverCry, and in today's video we'll be playing DMC Peak of Combat on PC via Bluestacks. I've used Bluestacks to play the previous closed betas, and they actually saw some of my videos and reached out wanting to support the channel, and so they're the sponsor for today's video. You can check the description or pinned comment for a direct link to Bluestacks where you'll be able to download it and play DMC Peak of Combat on PC. Seeing as I've followed Peak of Combat since its announcement, it's only fair that I play the game at launch and give you my opinion as somebody who isn't really a fan of mobile games, but is a big fan of DMC. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The game pretty much offers no context and throws you straight into the deep end from the very beginning. Dante hears a noise outside of a bar he's hanging out in, and all of a sudden there's demons. Whilst the game slowly starts to tutorialize Dante and the controls, I take the time to hop into Bluestacks here to effectively rebind the entirety of the touchscreen controls to a controller. There's a surprising amount of inputs and input types available via Bluestacks that really allows you to customize the experience. It's also worth mentioning that if you are playing on PC, you definitely need to go into the game's menu and tweak the graphical settings. From standard, the game has them set to medium, which probably is alright on a mobile on a smaller screen, but when blown up to the size of a PC monitor, the game looks horrendous. So I was able to set everything to max, and most importantly, change the frame rate from 30 FPS up to 60. The game still very much looks like a mobile game, don't get me wrong, but at least this way it's slightly easier on the eyes. Though if I'm honest, the standouts here have to be the character models. The main character models and a lot of the enemy models look far better than the environments that they're placed in. After those tutorials are effectively over, we are then introduced to Lady as a playable character. Dante feels vaguely similar to his incarnation in the console games, and that pretty much is the case here with Lady, though some of her moves in combat do seem bespoke to Peak of Combat as opposed to being ripped directly from the mobile games. The key gimmick to DMC Peak of Combat's gameplay is the character switching, which given the game's previous combat system in Peak of Combat 1.0 has been a point of contention in the community. Each character in this game features a very limited moveset. There's one attack button, one jump button, one dodge button, a devil trigger or similar mechanic button, and a special button, which typically is on a timer. A far cry from the DMC games that we've come to know and love on consoles. The way around this is through the character switching. A player can choose to take a squadron of 3 different devil hunters in their team, such as Nero, Lady, and Dante. Or if they want access to more of a character's moveset, they'll take 2 or 3 iterations of one character in that squad overall. Think of it as a very heavily modified or bastardized version of weapon switching. Shortly after we get accustomed to Lady's moveset, Nero then enters the fray, when we gain access to him permanently, rounding out our 3-man squad of devil hunters. As to why exactly Nero is here, no one knows. The story certainly doesn't explain it, so it's best that we don't think too hard. Following on from this, we then encounter Phantom, the classic boss from DMC 1, a fan favorite. He ends up chasing us just like he did in DMC 1, albeit this time it's just a lengthy QuickTime event and we can't actually fight him there and then. When we do fight him, however, Virgil enters the fray at the last minute, where we're able to take control of him to defeat Phantom, before he disappears into the ether once more, lest the IRS come looking for all those missing child support payments. If I'm being honest, the boss really didn't put up much of a fight at all, especially when you have 3 characters to swap between and a plethora of moves at your disposal. He definitely didn't live up to the expectations that DMC 1 set. That rounds out the end of Chapter 1 where we're back at the bar. The game then takes more time to tutorialize pretty much everything else. First on the list is the upgrade system, which is pretty much straightforward. You can spend resources to upgrade a character's passive innate statistics, as well as the statistics of their weapons individually, and you can also use those resources to purchase new skills. Most of these skills are pretty much passive entirely. However, the one skill that seems to be triggered by player action is enemy step or jump cancelling. It's not something that you can access straight away, unfortunately, even if you have the resources, as your characters need to be a minimum of level 20, which you're only going to be able to gain access to sometime towards the end or middle of Chapter 2. And if you've played the console games, enemy step pretty much works almost exactly the same here. The game then takes you through the gacha mechanics, which at this point, considering it's a mobile game, is entirely unavoidable. It looks like you're able to spend resources on a multitude of things, one of which is weapons, which I believe provide different statistics as well as a different look to the weapon, provided it's not a duplicate that you already own, and you can pull different versions of characters as well. Not only do these characters have different outfits entirely, but they also feature different weapons and different movesets, which again, this is where it plays into the character switching system. For example, if you want a Dante that uses Nevin in combat, or if you want a version of Nero that uses his Devilbringer in combat, then you're going to have to basically spend resources on this system to hope that you get a chance to pull them. I'm not much of a gacha fan or a mobile gamer at all, but for those of you that are, I know that Bluestacks does feature a reroll function which allows you to skip the steps in between each roll to save you time. You can even use eco mode during rerolls to reduce the strain on your PC when you've got multiple instances open. Unsurprisingly, you can also spend actual money on resources. Not something that I condone or something that I'm an advocate for, it's definitely not something I've ever done, but if you don't want to farm the resources the long way, the option is there. As you've probably seen by now, this game is a weird amalgamation aesthetically between DMC3 and DMC5, from things like the heads-up display or the mission results screen, or even some of the in-game activities such as destroying this Clyfoth route. You'll also notice that this game's decided to take creative license with a lot of the enemy and boss designs, such as the enigmas that you encounter in Chapter 2, which look slightly different but still resemble the enigmas that we've come to know and hate in DMC3, and of course Nevin, who looks entirely different from her iteration in that game, and I actually prefer DMC3's look to what they've gone for here. It was at this point that I came across something that I was dreading the entire time. This notification here that said, there's no way that you can win. What the game is trying to tell you here is that your character statistics or your weapon statistics are so low that you would effectively be doing almost no damage at all, and that it's probably worth coming back at some other point. That point being doing other challenges, other minigames, or replaying other fights. That wouldn't necessarily be all too much of a bother if the game didn't run on an energy system, where after you run out of energy, you are limited in what you can actually do in the game. Some of you might be thinking, well, you like DMC, so what does it matter if you do little damage and the boss can kill you in 1 or 2 shots, it just adds to the difficulty. Well, the difference here is the fact that the difficulty in DMC games, particularly Dante Must Die, have been acutely tuned to provide a tough but fair and fun challenge. Chipping away at an enemy's health bar and getting one shot is an entirely different experience, and one that I would argue is nowhere near as fun. I digress. I ended up using whatever resources I had to effectively level up my characters alongside their weapons and went off to fight Nevin. Nevin certainly was much more of a throwback than Phantom. She ended up pulling out a lot of attacks that were similar to her attacks in DMC3. She did also feature a small shield that you had to take care of before you could really cash in on the damage, and I overall found it to be a better challenge than Phantom, albeit still not near her DMC3 incarnation. With Nevin out of the way, that closed off Chapter 2, where I ended up unlocking Bloody Palace. It works largely the same as it does in the console versions, with you being ranked based on your performance, and you also get some rewards for clearing the Bloody Palace in the form of resources. Something else I briefly forgot to mention is that you can take each of the characters into a training room should you want to test out your moveset and the different synergy between all 3 characters in your squad whenever you use the character switching. And with that brings us on to my final impressions, so to speak, with my first few hours of Peak of Combat. To answer some of your questions, yes, I did prefer the combat in 1.0, when you actually had access to a character's full moveset. You didn't have timers on specific moves, there was an extra attack button, you were able to switch weapons on the fly, and you actually had access to a button for your firearms. I think the reason they changed the combat system for the global launch, or for the launch of 2.0, is mostly in thanks to the gacha system. I can imagine with what they have here, players are more enticed to partake in the gacha if they want to gain access to all these different moves and movesets. And on that topic, most of you who follow the channel know that I'm not really a fan of the gacha system. It's named a predatory system for a reason. Part of me hoped that I'd be able to play through most of the game without touching that system overall. But considering the game gates you pretty early on based on your health and damage stats, it seems as though the game really wants you to spend resources leveling up your characters just to progress through the story. In regard to the accumulation rate for resources, that's not necessarily something I can comment on confidently, as I know that a lot of mobile games like to bombard new players with resources right at the very beginning, to get that hooks into them before slowing down that rate dramatically as you get further into the game to push people into spending money. What I will say though is that it's definitely worth putting forward some constructive feedback towards the developers, whether it's things you like or don't like. At least that way it's on them to make the specific changes based on what the community wants. That pretty much brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date with anything and everything Devil May Cry. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.